the criticism over the sale of alcohol at petrol garages continues to grow. The Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance is urging BP to rethink its decision. SAAPA says the move to sell alcohol at petrol stations would increase a culture of drinking and driving. I'm now joined by Raymond Martin, who's the Gauteng Liquor Board CEO, as well as Maurice Smithers he's the SAAPA director. Gentlemen, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. Maurice, I'll start with you. Tell us a bit more about the memorandum handed to BP on Wednesday. What are you urging the company to do in this regard?
Thanks very much. Yeah, we had communicated with BP before when we first heard about this license being awarded, and also when we learned that there were others that had been applied for. And so we approached them, but their response was pretty much a non-committal response, in which they just said, look, this is a part of their expanding their offerings to the public, and that they would operate within the regulations, and it was a pilot that they were doing with this particular one, and that was all that they said. And they didn't really respond to some of the critical issues we raised, and so that's why we decided to have this protest this week outside the BP head office and hand over the memorandum in which we spelt out more about why we think that it's a problem, and spelling out that we don't think that it's a socially responsible thing to do for a company of BP's stature. So we're waiting to hear what they say. But as you said, we raised the concerns about drinking and driving. We raised concerns about easier accessibility to alcohol. We raised issues about children being able to see the alcohol, because children go into these shops and they look for sweets and chips and other things, and then they see the wine. We spoke about the fact that there's even a possibility, even though the license, I'm sure, is only going to be till 8 o'clock at night, like most bottle stores, there's still a possibility, because some of the petrol station shops are open for 24 hours, that you could find under-the-counter sales happening late at night when nobody's watching. So, generally speaking, we just think it's a very negative development, and it's an unnecessary development. And we've said to BP that they're not going to lose very much by withdrawing. It's not like BP is going to go bankrupt if they're not selling not selling alcohol at their petrol stations, and they could easily decide to change their plans right now, and take the moral high ground, which is what we think is necessary.
Now, Maurice, I want to track back a bit. In June, BP and Pick n Pay Express were issued a grocer's license that allows them to sell wine in Johannesburg, that is. And it seems that there are applications, or rather more applications in this regard. Tell us a bit more about the process to apply for these licenses.
Now, that's a very interesting question you're raising, actually, because in a meeting, and I want to just greet Raymond, by the way, because we had a very good meeting with Gauteng government 2 weeks ago, and they told us that this particular license, there'd been no objections, and so they were kind of confronted with a difficulty, because if there are no objections, it's quite hard for them to make a decision not to award a license, particularly if there's no legislation saying that they can't. The reality is that if somebody applies for a license, what they're supposed to do is to make all the necessary submissions to the liquor board. There's a whole bunch of requirements they have to fulfill. But what they also have to do is to advertise the fact that they are applying for a license, and they have to do that in the case of Gauteng, in the Government Gazette, in 2 local newspapers in the classified section, and then on the building where they want the license. The problem is, and then the public is informed that the license has been applied for, and then they have the right to object. And if they do object, then there has to be a hearing, which the liquor board presides over, and the applicant comes and the objectors come, and the issue is debated and discussed, and the liquor board then withdraws to make their decision. The problem, though, is that most of the public don't actually know that they have the right to object to liquor licenses. Most of the public don't even know how they would find out if a liquor license had been applied for in their area. So it is a problem that needs to be addressed because it's a democratic right that people have, and they should be able to exercise it, particularly given the fact that there are a whole range of problems happening in communities where licenses have suddenly appeared with people having no say over that at all.
Well, let's get the Gauteng Liquor Board to give us a bit more context as well. Raymond Martin joins us for this conversation. Raymond, I want to pose a similar question to that I posed to Maurice a short while ago. Just give us an idea of the legal implications and the processes to apply for liquor licenses, but specifically speaking to petrol garage stations here.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to Maurice and to all your listeners. Thanks for the opportunity to address this, I think, a very contentious issue that we have now been confronted with in the last couple of weeks. Firstly, I think Maurice has outlined a particular process that we follow as the Gauteng Liquor Board in awarding licenses to any applicant that makes an application to us. And I think Maurice has touched on very critical aspects of the Act that prescribes how we deal with applications as and when they are forwarded to us. So the first process, firstly, let me also say, remember, BP has what they would call a Pick and Pay Express store. So the license would have been issued not necessarily to BP, but to an express store of Pick and Pay. And that license that is issued is a grocer's wine liquor license. So the process as it is anybody who applies for a liquor license, there are certain requirements that a person needs to fulfill. Firstly, well, we expect a person to submit a SARS certificate, clearance certificate, SAPS certificate. But I think the critical parts that Maurice has spoken about is where there's an expectation that any application that is made to the Gauteng Liquor Board must ensure that a publication or publications are done in various media, especially print media. And so we insist that they do it, or the Act rather, insists that they do it in 2 local newspapers where the application may be. So we expect that if there is a Fundale local newspaper where this specific outlet was, it would have been published there, or in the Star, or in the Sowetan, or the Citizen. And most importantly as well, it has to go through the Government Gazette. And that gives an opportunity to anyone and everybody who realizes that there's going to be an application made at a specific outlet, that they are given an opportunity to object, as Maurice has correctly stated, in terms of Section 25 of our Act. So that process is important for people to know that at least they are given an opportunity to object if there is an outlet in their respective areas. And so it was no different to this particular application at a Pick and Pay Express, unfortunately located in a petrol station. Now, on the basis of those facts that we have presented, there was no objections. And let me hasten to say, so there's a 21-day waiting period between the day of lodgement of an application to the day that the local committee would deal with this particular application. And that 21-day is specifically given so that community members or any person who wishes to lodge an objection is entitled to do so. So the Act makes provision for the 21 days so that any objections that are raised, we can deal with. We would have, if there was an objection, we would have had a hearing. And on the basis of what was presented to the Liquor Board, the board would have determined whether it is necessary to have or to issue that license or not. I hope I've captured the essence of your question.
And I appreciate it quite a bit. Maurice, let's go back to these objections that are being raised by your organization. It would seem that such a move to allow for the sale of alcohol at petrol stations would possibly increase this culture of drinking and driving. Please explain this aspect for us.
Okay, first of all, just to put this in context, the South African government, the national government, adopted an alcohol policy, Cabinet adopted an alcohol policy in 2016, which following the guidelines of the World Health Organization and many, many other countries in the world, about more than 65 countries in the world, recommended that petrol stations don't get liquor licenses. The Liquor Amendment Bill which also was approved by Cabinet in 2016, takes that a step further and actually has a clause in there which says that you cannot have liquor licenses at petrol stations. And the reason that the South African government has done that, and that by the way, the KwaZulu-Natal government has done as well in their 2010 Liquor Licensing Act, the KwaZulu-Natal government has in fact also has a clause which says you cannot have licenses at petrol stations. All of these in South Africa and globally are because of the perceived risk, and in fact not just perceived risk, but a researched risk of there being an increase in drinking and driving. Now we have a situation in South Africa where we already have a major traffic incident problem, where the rate of traffic incidents in South Africa is much higher than many countries in the world, and certainly way above the international average. In addition to that, around 58% of traffic related deaths are in fact linked to alcohol. So the reality is we already have a problem. The national governments also recognize this through the Road Traffic Amendment Bill, which is currently before Parliament, which is actually calling for a 0 blood alcohol concentration level for drivers because of this particular problem. So, you know, if you look at that context, it's quite clear that that BP or Pick n Pay or whoever getting a license at a petrol station is simply going to add to the existing problem we have. And I want to just also contextualize it slightly more by telling you of what happened when we were at the BP head office on Wednesday, because BP is actually not working from their offices at the moment. They're working from home. So they arranged for the security guards to come and pick up the memorandum from us. And so a delegation of 3 security guards came to us, and one of them said to me, you know, we completely support what you are doing. He said, because if I go on a long trip and I'm in a taxi or in a bus, I want to know that if the driver pulls into a petrol station to buy petrol, he cannot go into the shop and buy liquor. And I thought that was an extraordinary statement from an ordinary South African who feels that his life would be at risk if there was an increase in the availability of alcohol at or near a petrol station.
Maurice Smith is there. He's the SAAPA director. We're also joined by Raymond Martin from the Gauteng Liquor Board, speaking to us there about what's become a very contentious issue around the sale of alcohol at petrol garage stations.